you everybody for joining, and JD and Brent for joining via the phone. You won't, hopefully you can see the slides just fine. Scott, appreciate you coming in and listening to learning a little bit more about these products and a little bit of the background about them. So what we're going to talk about today is LIFELINE performance supplements and give a little bit of background about the research we've done, how we understand these proteins, and essentially hopefully it'll help to lead you to understand why we've started looking at it in the equine markets. So to begin with, a little bit about APC. Essentially, APC was founded back in 1981. We are the world's largest spray-dryer functional bioactive proteins in plasma. We've essentially evolved from a performance enhancer in swine diets to specializing in protein fractionation. And that's our core business, is being able to take these proteins, fractionate them, and determine different applications and best fits for these different fractions. We've got a product line right now of nearly 20 different ingredients and complete end-user products. As I said, today we want to go over what are these bioactive proteins, what's an overview of them, how have we looked at these proteins. With that, I want you to think about proteins versus bioactive proteins. When we formulate a diet, we always think about proteins, what's the nutritional amino acids, what's needed for the animal, balancing that out. But once we have balanced that, such as in the swine diets, we show how much you utilize protein, energy, the minerals, amino acids such as methionine and lysine. When we utilize these proteins, we still get an improvement above and beyond the other proteins. Other proteins such as high quality like dried skim milk, synthetic amino acids. And so that's why we refer to as bioactive proteins, having this biological action beyond just the nutritional value. We've equalized the nutritional value in a lot of these previous studies, but yet we're still getting this response above it. So when we think about these bioactive proteins, think about them to maintain normal immune function and support the animal health. That's how we think about these proteins, and we're going to go through the research that helps to support that statement. And when you think about what we're collecting, you can take a plasma sample off of an animal and analyze all kinds of stuff in it. What we're collecting is a complex mixture of proteins. There's lots of different proteins that are there. That's why we have a lot of different actions, etc. So just to digress a little bit and talk about the traditional, where we came from. Traditionally, spray-dried plasma was thought as it was a protein ingredient, is added to starter feeds and increased feed intake. That was the classic response to where they started utilizing these proteins in piglets. They fed it to them and they really ate it well. Palatability was great. We also have an application in wet pet food as a binding agent. Again, more for the physical characteristics than the biological characteristics that we're going to talk about today. So there's been a lot of research done, primarily a lot in pigs, calves, pets, where we've shown a lot of these proteins. We've seen increased feed intake, improved growth, reduced diarrhea, reduced mortality. This is in livestock species. A lot of this has all been documented. I mean, there's 300 plus publications talking about these type of effects, and it's across all species, whether it be swine, poultry, ruminant aquaculture, or companion animals. So it works across a wide range of species. In summary, what do we see? What we see is that we've seen reduced effects of inflammation, we've seen reduced mortality when we've been in challenge situations, we see reduced treatments when they've been out in production settings, reduced clinical respiratory symptoms under different respiratory challenges that we have done, speeds repair of tissues. We've actually done some in vitro work and also in some piglets and ulcers and shown that the tissue would help to recover faster. We've seen improvements in digestibilities when we've done digestibility studies. And improvements in stool quality relates a lot with the reduction of diarrhea, firmer stools with animals that are utilizing these proteins. It comes along with digestibility, such as in pets, reducing stool volume. If it's more digestible, they're utilizing the nutrients better and less is being excreted. Another thing we've looked at is improvements in bone strength. We've done this in pigs, where we did DEXA scans on pigs and shown that we had better mineralization and stronger bones by those measurements. And then also improved reproductive performance. And when we go through the research in the more detailed mouse studies, you'll see why we talk about these different effects that we've gotten from these proteins. When we started out, we were trying to understand how these proteins work and what we see. We'd seen this reduction in diarrhea, less mortality, we'd seen better growth, better feed intake. So we started back in the 90s looking at things such as E. coli challenges, different viral challenges. We've got calves, we've got aquaculture, we've got shrimp, we got turkey poults, and really just kind of looking at different challenge situations and saying, what's the effect that we see? And overall, what this slide's showing you is we've got both bacterial, we got viral, we got protozoan, we've got enteric challenges, we've got respiratory challenges, and we're kind of looking at what the producer in this situation, livestock production, would see. Lower fecal scores, better gain, better survival, less scours, less shedding of the crypto, less clinical symptoms, better feed efficiency. Overall, what the producer is going to look at, we're seeing the benefits. But we're seeing this across multiple species, multiple type of challenges, like so whether it be respiratory or enteric, and then bacterial, viral, or protozoan. So when you've got this complex mixture and you're seeing all these effects, we would be asking ourselves, why? Why do these animals that are dosed with these bioactive proteins perform better than those that are given other protein sources? In all these studies, we would be looking at equalizing the nutrition of the diets under different challenge situations and still seeing these benefits when utilizing these proteins. And the first thoughts was a lot about palatability. As I said, the classical response in pigs was that you see an increase in feed intake. Well, if they're not going to eat it, you're not going to get the benefits of these proteins. But just because they like to eat it, that doesn't account for the differences that we see in all these other type of challenges. So we were looking a lot at the globulin protein. Is there an antigen-antibody effect? Could be a part of it, but the antigen-antibody effect can't explain my respiratory effect. I'm orally feeding them, and yet I'm having this respiratory challenge in these turkey poults, and I'm able to show a big difference in survival. So it can't just be that because there was no antibody-antigen interaction. So as we've continued to understand these proteins, that's where I talk about supports and maintains the normal immune system. Helping to support that immune system to deal with the different type of stressors that the animal is going through. So let's think a little bit about this immune system. And this is kind of immunology 101. The immune system has to respond to an infection, an injury, or a stress. Stress can be social, stress can be environmental, stress can be disease. There's lots of different stressors. We all experience these stressors. When the immune system gets activated, it takes energy. It's got to start releasing its cytokines and chemokines and coordinating this immune response to be able to respond. When that happens, you also get a lot of chances where you want it to respond, and then you want it to come back to normal. That's the most efficient immune response. We don't want to not have the immune system responding because there's times we need it. But we don't want it to go into a chronic state where it's wasting a lot of energy. And when you have a lot of this immune response, you can also get inflammation occurring. That's part of the classical immune response. So if you think about that, this stress, whether it be, for instance, for equine, whether it be training, whether it be, competition at the shows, whether it be hauling the horse all the way across the country to go to a show, there's lots of different stressors. It can be, the socialness, putting a couple horses together in the pen. Different things are going to affect this animal differently, which can trigger this immune response. And like I said, when the immune response happens, all these different organs start acting. They're producing the cytokines, the liver's having to pump out some, the amino acids are being uptake to start producing like a lot of the acute phase proteins to respond. Skeletal will start turning over, bone will start turning over. Classic response is reductions in feed intake. All these things are taking energy and nutrients from this animal to help support that system, which is what you need it to do. But think about it with these proteins, that what we see is, the immune system is costly, it's integrated, and it affects metabolism. So if we're affecting the whole body with the immune system, which is the normal response, it's what you want. When we utilize these proteins, we are able to have more energy and nutrients available for performance, whether it be competing in a competition, whether it be getting through different type of stressors, because the immune system, we're helping to support it and maintain it, so essentially reducing the cost of the immune system, or should I say, making it more efficient. It responds quickly and gets through the problem, and then you have less energy and nutrients going towards it. Whereas the animals without the proteins, you're not able to get through the challenge as well. You're more costly with the immune system. So think about it that way. When we're given these proteins, it helps to ease the overstimulation of the immune system so that these resources of this animal are able to respond better and get through the system. Again, that's what we talk about, helping to maintain and support the normal immune response. That's how we think about these proteins. And like I said, when we go into a lot of the mouse data, you'll see why we're thinking that way. So let's talk about inflammation. When the inflammation occurs, you can have damage. We all know that. You can have a lot of negative effects of different disease states that result. Some of the negative effects is reduced performance in the animal, potentially morbidity, mortality, different negative things that happen. But what we see with our proteins is we're able to reduce those things. So as we think about inflammation, we think about where could these proteins even have further application beyond where we're at, we start thinking about, what other conditions are associated with inflammation. Ulcers is one. We've done work now where we've helped to try to prevent ulcers. Reproductive problems. We're going to cover some of that where we've looked at reproductive measurements in mice and shown benefits on that. Inflammatory bowel disease is another area to look at. Heat stress. When an animal is heat stressed, you can have a lot of what I call leaking of the gut. The gut will start to open. Then you can have the toxins coming in, and if it gets worse, it's severe enough, you get endotoxemia. So essentially you can go into septic shock if it's bad enough. We've seen effects under calf studies that are under heat stress having less negative effects of the heat stress, meaning we get through it better than animals that were not. So as you think about it, we've listed here lots of different things when we think about what these proteins can do, different stressors that relate with inflammation, and how we can help the animal do better. So as we kind of think back, think about again this immune system. It's integrated, it's costly, and it changes metabolism. And when this system gets going, the whole body is being affected, whether it be muscle, adipose tissue, bone, liver. It's all got to communicate. And that's kind of how we talk about these proteins working. As you think about the mucosal surfaces, all these surfaces represent a significant interface between the host and the environment. The majority of the immune cells are concentrated in the mucosal surface. Gastrointestinal tract is one of the organs that has a lot of immune cells. So as we think about, we started thinking about these proteins, we started looking at these mucosal surfaces and saying, okay, if we're impacting the immune system and the response, we should have an impact on the different surfaces such as gastrointestinal tract, respiratory tract, reproductive tract, ocular, or urinary, a couple other ones. We have already hit the top three, the gastrointestinal tract, the respiratory, and the reproductive. And we're going to go into that in the detailed research here. So essentially think about the common mucosal immune system. This is when you look into the human literature and stuff. It all talks about how the different things are integrated, how one thing's impacting the other. So what we're doing is we started focusing first on the intestine. We knew we had these effects with the different challenge studies. We were seeing effects of both enteric challenge, we were seeing effects with respiratory challenge, which brought us to this common mucosal side. And so we started looking at it and saying, okay, let's focus first on the gastrointestinal tract. And that's what we're going to focus in here with the research. So as we started trying to understand this, we wanted to have controlled trials, ability to capture cause and effect, and so we started using the model species such as mice and rats. It was a way for us to ask specific questions after orally dosing these proteins and saying, what's the effect we get from this, to explain all of the production type effects that we've seen out in the livestock industry. One of the first review papers out there, and this was a group that we've worked with in Barcelona, Spain, is talking about these proteins and their impact on the immune system. Essentially what we saw, and quoted from the paper, is spray-dried plasma reduces overstimulation of the immune response in animals, allowing more energy and nutrients available for growth, other productive functions, rather than being diverted to support the immune system. And we're going to go into the research that supports it. And also what they noted was that the spray-dried plasma also has a systemic effect. It's interacting, having an effect on the whole body. This was published, I believe, back in about 2009. So as we started looking into it, one of the first things that we looked at in these studies was looking at inflammation in the intestine. This was the publication from it, published in 2010, where we showed, yes, intestinal inflammation causes negative effects. It can disrupt gut barrier function, and it can cause a range of health consequences. We all know if we get a little digestive upset, there's a lot of things that can start happening depending upon how severe it is. But we also know from this research that these proteins play an important role in limiting the consequences of it. And let's go into the details on that. Essentially, one of the things that we looked at was taken, again, as I said, we looked at different fractions. This model was set up in rats where we would do an IP injection of SCB. SCB stands for Staphylococcus enterotoxin B, kind of like a super antigen. We did an IP in order to remove the antigen-antibody effect. So we orally fed the proteins, and then we hit them with the SCB IP, which is known to cause intestinal inflammation. And this is what we were looking at when we first started this. We weren't sure, how much inflammation we would have. So we have two compounds, both the dextran and horseradish peroxidase, HRP. And we wanted to use those as the markers to look at the flux, essentially the openness of the gut, or shall I say the leakiness of the gut, across the intestine. So we had our control group that was fed just regular rat diet. And then we had an SCB challenge group fed regular diet. And then we had an SCB challenge group fed the proteins, the plasma proteins in this situation, and then another fraction that we had we'll identify as IC, like a globulin fraction. And essentially what we were looking at is the flux. We would take these tissue samples and then look at it in the Using chambers, the flux of the dextran or the HRP. Dextran being a smaller compound, HRP more of a bigger compound. And what we see is with the gut inflammation, we see an increase with the challenge, the SCB, which you would expect. We gave them the SCB, it caused inflammation, and you would expect the gut to have more inflammation occurring, indicating leaky gut. It occurred with both the dextran and the HRP. But when these animals were dosed with the proteins and challenged, they were more similar to the control that had never experienced the challenge. Now look at this as a snapshot in time. At this point in time, when we took the samples, they were significantly lower than the animals that had the challenge. Now, I'm not saying animals don't experience challenge. All the animals, when we challenge them, they experience the challenge, but they get through it faster. They're more efficient, again, with getting through the issue that they're dealing with. And so what we see here is this is helping to maintain the intestinal barrier function. The bottom part here is showing you electron microscopy of HRP. And essentially the dark line we're saying here, that's the HRP going through the intestine between the enterocytes. When you utilize these proteins, there's a lot less going through, more similar to the control as indicated by the graphs. So as we look at this, and this was published back in 2006, these bioactive proteins help to reduce the deterioration of the intestinal epithelium, helping to maintain the gut junction proteins during this type of inflammation, indicating an improved intestinal barrier function. So if we can help, again, maintain that gut, overall that helps to also support the animal. Another thing, when you think about leaky gut, part of what helps to hold these enterocytes together is what's called tight junction proteins. So we also wanted to look at the expression of those. And one, as an example here is beta-catenin expression. And this one I like because it's got essentially a time course kind of thing. At 24 hours and then at 48 hours we took samples. And what you would expect is that if you've got inflammation, you've got leaky gut, you should have less expression of these tight junction proteins. And that's what we had. The orange bars, it was significantly, it was down, reduced. At 24 hours, the animals that were dosed with these proteins, they were intermediate between the challenged group and the unchallenged group. So as I said, they experienced the challenge, as indicated here. But then by 48 hours, we're getting back closer to what the animals were that had never had the challenge. So again, indicating, helping to get through it faster. The challenge group is starting to come up, but not near at the rate that we're seeing with the animals that were dosed with these proteins. So again, these proteins helping to support the response to this challenge and get through it better. And the graph here is just showing how we measured it, lighting it up to look at the expression of these proteins. Another thing that we looked at in the intestines, we've talked about supporting the immune system. Well, what about measuring specific immune parameters? And so we looked at pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines, the messengers of the immune system. This work was published in 2010, and essentially what we were doing was looking at the mucosal level, are we impacting what I call the inflammatory response? And what we see again is when we challenge them, we see an increase in TNF-alpha. It's exactly what you would expect. Increase in inflammation. The TNF-alpha is one of the first responders, and it is reacting. But then what we see is the animals that were challenged but dosed with the proteins, we see kind of an intermediate response. Reduced between the challenge and the control group. Again, indicating, that's where I say it's a snapshot in time. If we would have taken it 40, later, maybe it would have even been lower. Again, the animals are not having to experience that challenge. They're able to get through it better with the challenge that they're having. And we think it's being mediated by the fact that when you have the immune system, you want the pro-inflammatory cytokines to respond, take care of the problem, and then you want the anti-inflammatory side of the immune system to come back and start shutting it down, get it back to normal. When we look at the anti-inflammatory side, which is the IL-10, when you're under a challenge situation between the control and the challenge, no difference, because the animal is under inflammation. But when we utilize these proteins under that challenge, we see a significant increase compared to the challenge group, indicating that, again, the animals, they experience the challenge, but yet it's starting to bring it back to normal faster. And that's what we feel is that, the SCB definitely induced intestinal inflammation, as we have characterized by the different pro-inflammatory cytokines. But by utilizing these proteins, it helped to prevent the induced increase in the pro-inflammatory and the effects potentially being mediated by enhanced IL-10 production. So again, helping that system be more efficient. Any questions right now? That's the intestinal tract. That's just kind of high level. We've got a lot of other work in other species. We've done this in mice, and then a lot of the questions we've got is like, well, you've seen these effects in mice. Well, what about pigs or poultry? And we've got more research demonstrating these type of effects in pigs, and it helps to support what we're seeing in livestock species. Why do we see better growth? Why do we see less diarrhea in these pigs? So now I'd like to move on to the respiratory tract. As I said, we have a systemic effect. We had done work with turkey poults where we did a respiratory challenge early on and saw a significant difference in survival rates by orally dosing these proteins. So we designed a study in mice using LPS as a challenge intranasally to look at what's happening at the mucosal surface of the respiratory tract, not at the gut now. So we're orally feeding them, hitting them with a challenge intranasally, and looking at what's happening at the inflammation occurring in the respiratory tract. And as our hypothesis, if we're helping to support and maintain a normal immune system, they should be able to get through this type of challenge better. So in this situation, we had a non-challenged group, either regular rat or mice diet, and then one fed the proteins. We had both positive and negative controls in this study. And when they're not challenged, you would not expect any TNF-alpha. There's actually some lines there, but you can't hardly see them. But when we challenged them, 6 hours after the challenge, we see a significant increase in TNF-alpha with the LPS challenge of the mice that are fed the control diets, which you would expect. We hit them with inflammation, the challenge, and they experience the challenge. The animals that were under the same challenge but dosed these proteins in their diet were significantly lower. They still experienced the challenge, as we can see from the non-challenge group, but not near as high. They were able to respond, having less of an inflammation. At 24 hours, TNF-alpha is one of the first responders. It would normally come down, but this kind of blowout here shows that even though it's coming down, it's still significantly lower, less energy cost, when we're utilizing these proteins dosed to the animal under this type of challenge. Another example beyond just TNF-alpha is a pro-inflammatory. We looked at interleukin-1 alpha. Same response. At 6 hours, it's starting to come up, but it's significantly lower on the animals that were dosed with the proteins. And at 24 hours, it's coming up further, but again, being significantly lower, indicating that we're impacting that response, helping the animal to get through and not to be able to deal with the challenge. The other part of it, as I said, we also wanted to look at the anti-inflammatory. And in this situation, we measured both TGF-beta1 and IL-10, two anti-inflammatory part of the regulatory system. Again, when they're not challenged, you would expect them to be normal, and we did when utilizing these proteins, normal responses compared to the control. But when they challenged the animals that were challenged with LPS, and then not having the proteins, their anti-inflammatory is down. They're still responding. They're having to deal with the immune challenge. Whereas the animals that were dosed with our proteins, the bioactive proteins, we see a significant increase in the anti-inflammatory. Again, we see this with both the TGF-beta1 and IL-10, demonstrating again, they experience the challenge, the immune system responds, and able to then come back, shut it back down, and get back to normal faster. Again, indicating that we're also impacting the respiratory side of it. And this is at the mucosal side of the respiratory. So what we concluded from this was that the supplementation helped to attenuate the pulmonary inflammation response. It was induced by LPS. And again, the effect can be explained by the enhancement of the anti-inflammatory factors that are within these proteins. And this work just published in 2012. So there's a lot more details in the write-up on it. And this is the publication. Essentially what we were talking about, the different fractions, helping to reduce the pulmonary response. Essentially, they're communicating from the Galt cells and helping to support the oral intervention of these proteins as a new strategy to help prevent, manage, and attenuate lung inflammation. We had done the turkey work. We've had this response in mice. Since then, we've done work in PRRS challenge in pigs, demonstrating that pigs are able to get through the PRRS challenge better. They actually reduce the viremia. And there again, PRRS is kind of an immunosuppressive condition where again, at that snapshot in time, the pro-inflammatory cytokines were higher on the animals that were dosed with these proteins, but higher in this situation with PRRS indicates helping to deal with the challenge and then coming back down, clearing the virus faster. Another example we've done is SIV, swine influenza virus in pigs. We've done challenges like that. And again, animals that were consuming the proteins, we would see less lung lesions in those pigs. So again, other examples that we've seen beyond just the model species. Questions on the respiratory side? If not, we'll continue into the reproductive. Another, as we talked about, if we're impacting the common mucosal immune system and we're orally dosing these proteins in the intestinal tract, we should have impacts on reproductive. We had done some looking back into the human literature, and this is a summary by Rohbacher in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, where the immune system is known, and inflammation can disrupt progesterone maintenance, so it's disrupting maintenance of pregnancy, and it also can disrupt maternal-fetal interface. So when you get this inflammation going, there's a lot of, again, negative effects that can happen at the reproductive site. So if we're impacting the immune system and the inflammatory response to help the animal, we should be impacting reproduction. We've done some work in sows where we've shown some nice responses of having less abortions, less repeat services. And so what we wanted to do is really ask the question specifically. And so we designed a mouse study, and this was work that we did with the University of Illinois. It just published last year in Journal of Animal Science. And the idea here was that, well, we're going to have these mice, we got them from Jackson Laboratories. They were confirmed pregnant by Plug Positive by Jackson Laboratories, put on a plane and shipped to the University of Illinois. When those pregnant mice arrived, they were randomized onto their treatments, whether they were on the control or different levels of the various proteins. We didn't know what level to feed, so we arranged it from 1 to 8%. When we first started, we felt like we were having difficulty keeping the mice pregnant. Well, what we found out as we started looking at the numbers is it was the controls that we weren't keeping pregnant. When we started, we had to replicate this many times because of the number of animals we had to have. And as you can see, our controls was less than 5%, just of a transport stress. We didn't do any type of pathogen challenge or anything. We just put them on a plane right after they were confirmed pregnant, randomized them onto the different treatments, and we only had about 5% of the controls stay pregnant. Whereas the animals that were dosed anywhere from 1, 2, 4, or 8% of these proteins saw a significant increase. 1% was about 35% maintained pregnant. And as we titrated up the level of these proteins, we plateaued at about 4%. And we looked at it and said, well, that's great, but what's normal? So we called back to Jackson Laboratories and said, what's your normal pregnancy rate if these mice didn't ship? And they reported to us a little bit over 40% pregnancy rate. So we were able, with these proteins, to bring the pregnancy rate back to normal. After this type of stress, being a transport stress, we were able to reduce the effect of that stress. Not a disease challenge, not a specific inflammation, just the stress that can happen. When stress happens in an animal, you can have inflammation start occurring. And again, we had hypothesized that we could be affecting this mucosal surface, and sure enough, we were able to show that these proteins, under this type of stress, were able to improve pregnancy rate. As I said, we've got applications in sows now where they've been able to demonstrate under different type of stress, specifically more of the PERS type challenge, they're able to maintain the pregnancies much better in those type of animals. And like I said, this just published last year, and essentially the conclusions from the paper was pregnancy rate of the mated female mice after transport, it was affected, that these proteins improved that, and also the growth performance of the pregnant mice was improved. There's more details again in the publications on this different research. That kind of covers the detailed research. I mean, there's a lot more stuff we can talk about, but that gives you kind of the high level, different mucosal surfaces we've looked at. Hopefully now it makes sense as to why we say these proteins help to support and maintain the immune system and help animals thrive and get through various stressors. Any questions on that?
So,
yeah.
Joy, just looking. Are those papers that you could send us a copy of?
Yeah, we can get you papers.
Okay, great, thank you.
So as you went kind of through that series of studies, is the protein makeup and what's been fed, what's been utilized similar throughout, or are they different fractions?
We've utilized different fractions. Sometimes we've used porcine, sometimes we've used bovine. We've looked at all different types of things. We've had sometimes different fractions, like I said, processes and things. But what we've seen is mainly demonstrating.
How have you selected a fraction source, the fraction and the source for like the reproductive study in mice?
Well, essentially what we've done is we look at kind of our complex mixture, and in this situation it was looking at the total mixture together. And we said, you know, we think we'll have these effects, and so that's what we utilized. And as, like I said, in some of those others, we had more detailed fractions, and we still were getting a good portion of the effects. So as we've continued to understand these proteins, that's how we look at it. And that's part of why when we went into the equine side, one of the first things we wanted to do is say, okay, here's what we think will work, and we tested it before going out and demonstrating the effects.
So from the standpoint of large-scale manufacturing and sales, is it simpler and less costly to use a large mix?
We
Or-
look at what the different processes are, and depending on what kind of application we're going into, and yes, we look at it from an economical standpoint to make sure that we can produce large
But the more finer
quantities.
detail, the more difficult, correct?
Oh yes, yeah,
Okay, just make-
Yep. Yes.
It's not a separate and then blend back,
It's doing different processes. Yep. Well, what I wanted to move into now is talking a little bit about, before I go on, is there any more questions on the science side of it? Specifically on the mouse and how we think these proteins are working. If not, I'm going to go into more the equine side of it now. When we first got started, we tested some of our products and we said, okay, let's go out and ask some people to evaluate this and see what responses they get. We didn't tell them what to expect. We just said, we want you to utilize this. We want to take a picture of your horse, and in 14 days we want to come back and take another picture and get your comments. And what this is showing the slide now is we had a couple different horses. You can see the before pictures. One was a 26-year-old thoroughbred mare. Another one was a 21-year-old warm-blood thoroughbred mix. And after 14 days, you could visually see a difference in these animals. Being able to have, nicer shine coat, a little bit more weight on some of them. This one you can see we put some more weight on. The animals were doing better. And we saw this when we started looking at different things. We expected to have some responses, and we started asking people, what did you notice? What are you seeing in these animals? Appearance, 49% of them said they could see an appearance. If an animal is doing better, you can see that they're doing better. Joint was another one that they had commented. Behavior. Again, I can imagine if, the animal's got a stomach ache or a belly ache, they're not going to be wanting to train or ride very well. But what they were noticing is a better behavior. Gut. Gut would fall into a lot of the research that we've done, demonstrating when we look inside the animal, we're seeing the benefits of the gut. 19% of them had no difference. Some felt inflammation, respiratory, immune, and reproductive. All these areas we've just talked about where we would have some impacts. So if we've moved into the horses, we've also looked at doing controlled studies in horses. And I'm going to highlight some of the research that we've done. This is looking at stride length at Texas A&M. And essentially when we started this out, we said, okay, we want to look at these proteins in these horses, in the formula, and say, what's the effect? And then we use stride length as kind of a measure to look at movement, because we're hypothesizing, again, if you got, if the animal's been exercised and has a lot of stress, if any of you guys are runners or exercise, you get sore. You get soreness, it's probably a result of inflammation. So if we're able to help these animals move better, then it would be beneficial for training, etc. So we had 30 mature quarter horses ranging anywhere from 5 to 22 years. In this situation, we had what we call 3 treatments. We had a commercial pelleted concentrate, and they essentially got no additional pellets. It was just their normal concentrate they were getting. Then we fed either 66 grams of the biothrive proteins or 132 grams. We called it both a low and high dose. We wanted to just see what the effect was. And then we looked at gait analysis, and we performed that on day 0 to know what their baseline gait analysis is, 14 days later, and 28 days, because we didn't know how quickly we'd see the response. This is what it turned out. We presented this in an abstract form back in 2014. We were looking at range of motion, knee range of motion. So essentially we've got our controls that had nothing, the lower dose, and the higher dose. By 14 days, both the lower and higher dose were significantly higher than the controls on knee range of motion, indicating better range of motion. By 28 days, they've been exercising. The controls and stuff are starting to come up. The lower dose was kind of an intermediate response, but with the higher dose, they continue to have better range of motion. So again, more of a titratable response. We looked at stride length on both the right front and the right hind quarter. And again, in 14 days, we saw a nice increase with either the lower or the higher dose. As we continue to exercise these animals, they continue to stretch out further with the higher dose, again indicating a nice linear response, able to keep the animals moving better. So essentially, as we concluded from this, the increased stride length and knee range of motion suggests improvement in joint function and or comfort of the animal, helping the animal get through this type of stress. We did a follow-up study with the same group, and in this situation, we wanted to even look at higher doses. We went from 0, 70, 140 to 210. We had 32 quarter horses on this study, and essentially they ranged in age from 5 to 19 years of age. We had 8 horses per treatment. On the previous study, we had 10 horses per treatment. So we had to reduce a little bit of power in the analysis. But again, they were exercised by a single student 5 days a week. We again looked at the gait analysis, and what we saw was the stride length increase at 28 days. At day 14, and we'll go through this, the 140 dose had a little bit of variability. As you can imagine, when you only have 8 horses and one horse kind of is kind of an outlier, we couldn't see any reason to remove him. But he did add more variability in this situation. With the number of horses we had, we didn't see any range of motion, knee range of motion. But just to give you the visual, we did see, like I said, not as much with the range of motion in this. There was a younger population than we had previously. But we still see some nice benefits. And this is, again, 14-day and 28-day. Essentially with the different, here's the different doses. So here's your controls. And then 70, 140, or 210. As we looked at the stride length, you can see a nice linear increase. Like I said, there's the one that the one horse really influenced. But again, as we look at the right hind, again, a linear response that we were seeing with utilizing these proteins on stride length, being able to stretch out further. So again, increased stride length suggests improvements in joint function and comfort of the animal. So as we look at these 2 trials, we present both of them in abstract form right now. We're working in the process to get these published. The 2 trials confirm that BioThrive improves stride length, range of motion in horses during training in this type of training situation, and the response is dose dependent. The other work that we've done is working with Dr. McClure at Iowa State University on ulcer prevention. And I'm just going to highlight the first study. And this just recently has been accepted for publication. Essentially what we did is we had 30 horses that were not being treated for gastric ulcers, no NSAIDs within 2 weeks of the study. We then had a period 1 where they were scoped and performed, they were verified absent of gastric ulcers. And so then the horses were administered the BioThrive while maintaining the normal level of activity for the first 6 days, for the first week. After that, in period 2, still on the supplement, the horses were subjected to daily training. So trained to load on trailers, off trailers, taken on short trips, essentially going through the stress of training. And at the end of 21 days, they were scoped again at the conclusion of the trial to look at the effects of what would happen. In these type of situations, a lot of times horses will start to develop ulcers. And this is what we see. We looked at the ulcer incidence. Like I said, this just got accepted for publication. So what we had seen is with the placebo, the site was blind to what they were dosing. They just had pellets, A and B. So they didn't know which one they were getting. So we had a placebo pellet, and then we had the BioThrive containing pellet. The horses that were dosed with the placebo had an 85.7% incidence of ulcers at day 21. They had developed that. The horses that were dosed with BioThrive had a 14.3% incidence. So essentially demonstrating that these BioThrive proteins, again, helping to prevent the incidence of ulcers. We've since then ran a second study, which is also in the publication, where we did a little bit lower dose, just again see if the effect was still there, if it's dose dependent. And what we had with the placebo in that situation was about 67% incidence, and the horses that were dosed with the BioThrive about a 33% incidence. So again, not quite as dramatic, but still demonstrating the benefits of these proteins. Any questions on the equine research? That's what we've done so far on controlled equine research.
Joey, what was the dosage on that first ulcer study again? How many grams per day?
210.
210, okay.
So now I just want to kind of talk a little bit about, as we think about these proteins, kind of recap a little bit, what do they do for us? What we've seen is reduced inflammation, improved range of motion, stride length in horses. We've helped to prevent, ulcers, probably the gut issues. As we've seen in a lot of the mice studies and other livestock species, improved immune response. We've demonstrated, reduced respiratory issues. As we look at this, it's consistent and repeatable. We've seen this effect time and time again across all these different species, whether it be swine, poultry, ruminant, aquaculture, equine, dog, and it continues to happen in multiple studies. It's not just one study we've done. There's a lot of research out there, and everything I've presented to you today is out in the public domain and being published. So it's gone through peer review, demonstrating the effects of what we see with these proteins. So when we think about Lifeline Equine, there's kind of 3 points to kind of take home with these products. It's proven effective, essentially these serum-based proteins. We've got multiple benefits, and hopefully you understand now why we talk about these multiple benefits. Joints, lungs, and gut. It's a multi-systemic type product to help the animal, based on all the research that we've done. Like I said, in the mouse studies, I highlighted some of the key ones. There's more research on those, where we've looked at defensin production, antimicrobial production in the gut. We've looked at various things within the gut. And it works fast. What we're seeing is a response in 14 days. As you can see, when those first people started utilizing the proteins, they were seeing the response, seeing the animal doing better in 14 days. With the stride length, we saw an improvement in 14 days. We saw further improvement at 28, but we were able to see it at 14 days. So as we think about, active ingredient differentiation, what is it? The BioThrive is a trademark name for our serum-powered bioactive proteins. It's proven to work in multiple body systems. It's proven to help ease the negative effects of stress, and it is made by a proprietary process. It's a process we developed specifically for these. As we think about, again, the multiple benefits, just to highlight, when you think about joints, proven to help improve stride length and range of motion by easing occasional soreness in the exercise. We've seen it in the people commenting about lungs, offsets breathing, respiratory issues related to regular exercise. Again, everything helping with the lung side. And as the gut, as we've seen with the ulcer prevention, supports and maintains a healthy intestinal tract, helping to keep that animal doing better. Any questions related to the research and kind of the detailed science questions? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Monty and let him talk a little bit about the applications and what we're seeing in the field.
We had to run out of the product. In about 30 days, we ran out. And this colt that was happy for 2 or 3 weeks, when I ran out, within a week or two, he got grumpy again. So that really spurred my interest to say, what is this stuff? What did it do? And then I met Joy and a lot of folks with the company and found out what the proteins were. Well, in the meantime, Cindy's 3-year-old started to perform better. Cindy thought that the horse gained weight and was shining better and this and that. And the Iowa Futurities were coming up. And Cindy got in her mind she had to have her horse on this product. And we had to beg Joy for more because the owner, the rider, thought she had to have these proteins to compete now. And so that's really how I started with the company. But now after being with the company for 3 years, I've got all kinds of anecdotal evidence. Joy showed a slide talking about 3 of the body systems, the mucosal systems. The respiratory one is one that just fascinated me, where I get these stories of Dr. Rex Bridgman out in Erickson, Nebraska, had 2 old gray rope horses. He could rope 1 or 2 steers a day, and they'd hack and cough, and he was done. And he tried some samples, and all of a sudden he's roping all day on these 2 old gray mares. Why in the world did these proteins help these old, heavy kind of horses rope all afternoon? Then we had Terry K. Kirkland, who's a barrel racer out in Billings, Montana. She's a trainer of barrel horses, and she had 4 bleeders and wanted to try it. So we ship her some product, and 3 of those 4 bleeders she quit giving Lasix to, and they're not bleeding. The 4th one, she reduced her Lasix dose from 10 cc's down to 3. That was kind of anecdotal, fascinating, fun stuff to hear. And I get more and more and more of those all the time. There's a veterinarian out in Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name right now. I think it's Jet, Dr. Jet. He tells me on the track out there he's using it for bleeders and having great results. Again, anecdotal, but all respiratory related. We go to the digestive benefits, and I can't tell you how many people have told me, my horses are staying on feed on the road. A lot of the cow horse guys are using our product, and they go to the snaffle bit futurity that lasts 3 weeks. And they tell me I got the same horse at the end of the 3 weeks that I had when I got there. Can't tell you how many people tell me I've had to cut my feed down because my horses were getting heavy. Again, anecdotally showing me that gut membrane's tighter, they're absorbing whatever groceries they're being fed. That's been fascinating for me. The horses that used to get the watery diarrhea when they backed them out of the trailer at the show or an event, when they're on the Lifeline, their stool consistency remains the same. Lots and lots of stories of this. Jamie Stover down in Kansas, I saw him over in Lincoln, Nebraska a year ago, and somebody said, do you have any ulcer guard or whatever the question was? He said, yeah, there's a sack full of it in my trailer. You can have it. I'm using Lifeline. It works better. Those kinds of anecdotal stories are pretty interesting to me. Dr. Charlie Buchanan down at the Brazos Vet Clinic in Weatherford, Texas, he tells me, Monty, I think your product's the best stuff for hindgut there is on the market. Again, anecdotal from what he's seen, just feedback has been fascinating that supports the science, but out in the field. Repro studies, I can't tell you how many studs I hear that their semen quality or quantity is better. Down at the Aaron Ranch, they spent a ton of money buying those high dollar studs. Blindsided down there, I think they bought Pepto Boone's Mall. And their veterinarian, Dr. Parker, tells me that they've seen a huge improvement in repro because of the Lifeline. Is it anecdotal? Yes, it is. There's a guy over in Colo that had a horse with Monty Bruce, an old stud. He claims he took it to Iowa State University, and they're amazed what his counts are this year. I don't know all the facts and figures on these things, but just the successes that are coming out has been fascinating. Out in Tennessee or Kentucky, there's all-around trainers, Tommy Sheets and Ryan Cottingham. I gave them a sample at the World Show in Oklahoma City in November, and I see them at March to the Arch in St. Louis in March, and they walk up to me and they said, Monty, we tried your stuff. We didn't see a difference. And you feel bad, and then they smile and say, until we ran out. After they ran out, they saw on these show horses those little minor aches and pain, body soreness kind of issue, probably inflammatory related. I get a lot of those stories that the users don't really know what the challenge, the condition. Is it body soreness? Is it a joint issue? But their horses seem to be doing better. Lots of appearance kind of things. My horses are shedding quicker, shining better, gaining weight, all those kinds of appearance category things. And a lot of behavioral. You look at our website and all the people that write in, my horse is better in the alley, these barrel racers. My horse is quieter in the box. The pleasure horses that write in and says it's like I flipped a switch on the light. I'm going around the pen and they're just more focused. It's been fascinating to hear the multi-systemic feedback. And you smile and you say, I think I know why, but we may not know exactly which condition was causing the challenge. But overall, anecdotally, it just supports all the science that Joy's kind of done over the years in the equine, model. So I think that we're talking the same thing if it's swine or if it's mice or whatever. We're talking about the inflammatory response, the immune response. Yes, there's lots of body systems. One of the big challenges is, does it sound too good to be true? And I find myself all the time, I can't go out and dump all these benefits on somebody. I need to focus on one or two that's important to that customer when I'm there. If I go to Tim McQuaid's ranch in North Texas, big, beautiful facility, couple hundred head of horses. His wife shows hunter jumpers. He's a reiner. And we picked out a horse that had a breathing problem. He couldn't run a reining pattern on it because it hacked and coughed. And reining pattern's 3 or 4 minutes long. So I give him a sample, and his assistant trainer, Sam Schaffhausen, calls me back in about 30 days and says, hey, Monty, can we get some more of that stuff? And I laugh, and I said, I'm happy to send you another sample, but does Tim like it? We showed that mare. She didn't cough once. Right? Those kinds of things are pretty neat. When folks that we are not sponsoring, we are not endorsing or using our product. Sean Flaherty is a reiner, won about $5 million. He's from out in Ohio. I gave him a sample at the Congress. His wife has a PhD in microbiology. She studied the science. They tried it on a few horses. We get a call back. Sean's going to the World Equestrian Games with a horse called Spook's Got a Whiz. They just shipped Spook in. Monty, where can we buy this at? We want to put Spook on it. Here's somebody again, sponsored by everybody in the world, has all the products available to him at no cost, but he and his wife decide they want to put their World Equestrian Game horse on our science or our product. I really appreciate where some of the leading exhibitors and trainers are leaning towards our proteins and our products. It just goes up and down the list. Now, not every discipline have we educated as well. The racehorses, I tell you what, we went to Ocala breeder sales, met a lot of those guys that are getting those colts ready. We went to Churchill Downs, talked to a lot of trainers, gave out a lot of samples. And we've had some hits. McCaffins that had American Pharoah, a couple of years ago, come through their program. They got 120 head in training right now. They got 40 head on the product. I talked to David McCaffin. He loves it. He's tickled. But I can't tell you the number one reason why he's buying. The biggest challenge in the racehorse world for me has been price. Everybody wants the low-cost deal. On Meprazole, they're using off-brand compounded this, lower inclusion rate. I don't know if that's the issue or not. The hunter jumper world, we're starting to get more exposure. We're working with a company called Farm Vet that puts trailers in all the hunter jumper shows. But we just haven't spent a lot of time there. Rodeo guys and gals, some of the best in the business are using our product. Probably 10 of the top 30 team roping teams in the country use our product, but a lot of the backyard ropers, I think price is an issue. They're saving money to enter the next jackpot. So maybe that hasn't been as successful, but the Western world, show horses, cow horses, AQHA, reiners, we got a good market share. A lot of the key players in the industry believe in our science. Veterinarian-wise, we've had some challenges. I think a couple of reasons. Number one, we do sell the product over the counter in your local feed store and the animal health outlets, and I've had some veterinarians tell me they don't like that. It is kind of a big bulky product to put in the clinic. These pails and bags are kind of a hassle to store somewhere in some of the smaller clinics and get them out to the clients. But I have only had one veterinarian not really agree with the science. So 99.9% of the veterinarians I talked to showed them some of the studies. They nod their head, they say, I understand, I get it, but why are you selling it at the local Tyson store, right? So I think it's been great so far, but I think we just need to educate an industry that the product is available in an oral form and how it works.